What was your journey from getting a PhD in physics in Cambridge to founding an internet company?
Yeah, well, like lots of these journeys, it wasn't an obvious step 1, step 2, step 3 journey. Like a lot of these journeys, it wasn't planned. When I was studying physics at university, that's all I wanted to do. I wasn't thinking of going somewhere else. When I was working as a researcher, that's all I wanted to do. I wasn't thinking about something else. Really enjoyed my research career. It was fantastic. Learning how things worked, doing experiments, testing new ideas. I had great mentors and colleagues. It was just a real highlight in my whole life, actually, was my time as a PhD student and as a researcher. And lucky me, that's why I ended up at ANU. And I had a job here. But then also, that's when things started to change. And I sort of looking at my career opportunities in the science field, and most of the jobs I could see were international. So go to America or back to Europe or places like that. And it didn't really suit me from a family point of view. I had some family commitments and I didn't really want to do that. So I started looking at different options. And a friend of mine had got a job at the Department of Defence, and I didn't even know such things existed. And they mentioned a job that had been advertised, so I applied for that and got a job in the Department of Defence doing as helping to analyse projects for their strategy area. So bit of a change, but what was in common with that and the reason they hired me is the skills I'd learned as a physicist about thinking clearly, really stepping through problems, really breaking it down, finding out exactly what's there, being clear about what I know and what I don't know. Physics is a lot about what you don't know. People think that science is all about what you know, but in fact, real science, real physics, it's a really important thing is understanding actually what you don't know, the uncertainty, that sort of thing. So I brought that lens in and jumped into the deep water of defence, which I knew nothing about, nothing at all. But, that's the other thing. You've got to be a quick learner in this space. So as a quick learner, learned all these new things, contributed to projects, had a great time. Fast forward a few years, 7 years-ish, I think, the internet was starting to become a thing. This was, 90s, early 2000s, .com boom, all of that sort of thing. Internet was becoming a thing, and my wife had set up a business building websites for people, as you do, because she was a technically minded person with a law degree. So again, it's the entrepreneurial spirit, and I want people listening to this, students, to be seeing, yes, it's good to get qualifications and really learn stuff from your courses, but what's really good is then to translate that into practical opportunities. And sometimes it's the obvious, just go and be a really good lawyer, and sometimes it's the non-obvious, the skills she learned as a law student and just being comfortable with computers, and technology. How hard can it be? I'm going to build a website, right? And next thing you know, you become an expert, and had a business around that. And because of that business, her customers were all entrepreneurs. Now, I wouldn't have ever used that word that time. What's an entrepreneur? I didn't even know. But they were all people who were really on the cutting edge, because conservative, old-style business didn't want to be on the internet. What's that? It's new. What's this newfangled stuff, right? And what's today's analogy? I don't know, AI or something like that. People are just afraid of it. But people who weren't afraid of this weird internet thing, I know it's not weird to you guys, were the people we were talking to. And by watching her clients and talking to her clients about how they were engaging with the internet, I started to get interested in business. That's just what happened. And then I was approached by my sister-in-law, who had a great idea for a business. Not my idea at all. Had nothing to do with the ideation of this business. But she was a marketing professional and said, when I look at how people book holiday houses, they're calling the real estate agent and they're looking it up in a book, a physical printed book. Let's get it on the internet. And we've got this great name, TakeABreak. Her and her husband, Paul, came up with this great idea and concept. So we got out the butcher's paper, the big white paper and some texters, and started scribbling all sorts of plans on it. We could do this and we could do that. And got a bit excited and thought, you know what? Let's do it. So build it. Maybe you want to ask me more questions, but then that's sort of how that was the real genesis. Does that little bit answer your question? Yeah.
No, that's such an interesting story, and I'm interested to know, from your physics background, obviously you would have trained up a lot in first principles thinking and breaking down decisions, and coming from a world outside of entrepreneurship. How did that help you when you translated into the world of business?
Yeah, so look, breaking things down, understanding what's really going on, which is not necessarily what it seems to be on the surface. Also, I was an experimental physicist, so I would measure things and do experiments, and I would try something. Now, in the practical reality too, by the way, of physics experiments, you may or may not be aware of this, is most of them don't work, right? You play around the lab, you do things in the lab, and that didn't work because I didn't get the measurement right. That didn't work because the machine broke down, or this didn't work because I didn't understand enough what was going on. So you're constantly making mistakes, and I was really used to that. And so even though you think physics or hard sciences are about being very, very exact about things, they're also about actually exploring and figuring out why something didn't work. And so that was the mindset that I brought to every business problem. We're trying this, why didn't it work? Or, we told a customer this, why weren't they excited? Does that make sense? And I'm probably telling the story slightly out of order because I want to be careful because I'm probably making this sound that like it was a little bit more clever and well organized than it was. The actual reality, if I probably could remember all the details, would be far more messier than that, and far less clear, And there was all those times where we really thought we knew what we were doing and we were super clever, and there were all those times when, the disk drive failed on our servers and the backup hadn't been run correctly, and the backup took between 11 p.m. and 9 a.m. to be restored from. The time we lost half the images that people had uploaded to our website, and we sent off a disk drive to like a forensic service to recover deleted data. We did some really dumb stuff. So I want to be clear, we weren't just super smart and every step worked and all of that sort of thing. What was the question again? I forgot.
Well, it was more just like from your physics background, yeah. And do you think that gave you a bit of a leg up maybe on other entrepreneurs?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So what I was just giving you a bit of a be careful. I tell a story like it was a really lovely little story, and that's not true. But the lovely story is that I like to test my ideas, and over time I started getting better and better at testing ideas, and I used the language with my team called test and try, right? I want to test and try things, right? Which actually sounds a bit similar to a lot of more modern startup ideas. Lean startup is based on testing and trying your ideas. I didn't do it in exactly that way, but I had that mindset, testing things. So we would try stuff, and what worked we'd do more of, and what didn't work I think that's the other thing I brought from my science career was that science notion of being really, really honest about what didn't work, or what, we don't just say that was great because I want it to be great. What was the the hard truth about the matter. We tried that; it actually wasn't that great. And I think that slightly brutal self-honesty about that was a very big contribution from my science career.
Were you pretty data-driven in that sort of testing and analysis as well?
Look, later we were, right? Once when you've got effectively an e-commerce business, you've got a website, you can track lots of things. I got hundreds of thousands of users and visitors and all of that sort of thing. You get lots of statistics. And so we became over time quite data-driven. But I don't want people to have the impression I was data-driven from the start. I gradually learned that.
So in this process of testing ideas, seeing what works and what not, you're trying to develop, a bit of product market fit. Maybe you can explain to the audience like what product market fit is and how do you know when you have product market fit?
Okay, so I can tell this story two ways. I can tell you what my concept of it was, 20-something years ago, and then I can tell you what my concept of it is today. We wouldn't have ever used a phrase like product market fit. Back then we would have just said, I don't think we even had a concept for it. We just thought this is awesome. This is what I reckon people will like, and then we pushed it as hard as we could, right? And then later we started to evolve it, and then later I discovered that was pretty much even after I sold the business. We discovered concepts like product market fit that came from great thinkers like Eric Ries and Steve Blank, who really pioneered the theory of that. Product market fit is when there's a market who wants your product, right? We tend to think of it as a binary thing. You've got it or you don't, but in fact it's a spectrum. How strong is your product market fit? You've got strong product market fit when your customers will pay a premium price for what you're doing. You've got product market fit when it's easy to sell, or when there's a queue. When there's a queue outside your door, that's a sign of product market fit. Product market fit is what all businesses love to have, and it's not as easy to find as most people as you sort of think, right? So product market fit is that, and early signs of product market fit is when people are just really excited about what you're doing, right? When that wow factor, that I didn't even know I needed that, but now I heard about it, I really got to have it type idea, especially with more innovative things, because people don't always know what you've got. Again, going back to the original days of TakeABreak, we had a great idea that booking holiday houses was something that would be really relevant to retirees, travel a lot, all of that sort of thing. So we went to some trade show expos full of retirees, and they said, "What do you mean? I don't even have a computer." So, it was, they needed the accommodation, but they they were really not engaged in the internet at that time, right? So you've got to understand all of those things, and maybe later they became big users of this sort of service. But at the time when we first started pitching to them, they were like, "What is that?"
Was TakeABreak like? I mean, I'm assuming there are a lot of other internet rental companies out there already.
Oh yeah, so it's really important that to be clear, we had at one point I counted 1,000 competitors and stopped counting. Right, that on the internet it's very easy to be a competitor. It's very easy to be in this space. There was a lot of people who saw, roughly speaking, the same opportunity as us. Some of them came to that with lots of experience in the travel business. Some of them came to it with lots of, their own angles. And like in many sectors, and especially when a new sector that's sort of hot or cool, which we only discovered after we went into it because we didn't think about it, there's going to be competitors, right? So there was always competitors, and then we had to think, how do we thrive in that competitive environment? How do we stand out? How do we do a great job for our customers? All of that sort of thing. Does that sort of answer your question?
I'm just thinking from maybe from the perspective of the aspiring founder, has an idea, already sees a lot of competitors out in the landscape. Is that a bad sign, or
look,
how should a founder approach that?
It's not a good. So we'll come back. We'll come to 2025 now, and I'll tell you a little bit more of the modern thinking here. So if you think I want to do such and such, and nobody's doing it, I'm not saying that's a bad sign, but you need to be aware that it means that people don't know that that's a needed thing, right? It's a headwind. If lots and lots of people are already doing it, that's also a headwind in a different way, which is now how you're going to stand out, right? Now, most innovations are somewhere on the spectrum between those, between the ends of hyper competitive, everyone's doing it, to nobody's ever heard of this thing before, right? And you're usually somewhere on the spectrum, and maybe that will shift over time. So what I would say is, first, as you're conceiving an idea, is to actually go out there and engage in the sector and look around you and talk to people and find out what that is, right? So you've got this great idea, right? Google it. Because maybe somebody's done the exact same thing already, right? It's a basic early step. Now, if you see on Google some people have done very similar things, don't be discouraged. See that as a challenge. Now, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to take this forward? I can go head to head with the similar things and execute better, or I can market it better, or I can refine the product, or I can be the next generation step ahead, or I can sell a very similar product to different customers. There's a whole range of responses. So if you're excited about something, don't be encouraged or discouraged by what you find. Just take that into account as you figure out how to take this forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was listening to a Stanford talk with Mark Zuckerberg the other day, and he was saying that when he was launching Facebook, first he launched at Harvard and then at other universities around the States, but the university he chose to launch at already had existing competitors, existing Facebook competitors. And his rationale was basically, I want to see if Facebook is actually valuable even in this competitive landscape with a bunch of other companies, and if it's worth my time. And I've heard plenty of other stories. Another guy said he made his first 10 sales only from cold outreach, no warm leads, as a way to test his ideas. Do you see that kind of thing often? Is that something you would recommend to almost make it harder for yourself?
Look, there's some truth in that, and I'd probably say there's, in a way, you want to set high standards for yourself and challenge and know where you're at, right? So if you, it's different people for different styles, but if you're pushing harder and saying you're that brutal self-reality I said before, right? If you can sell something to your friends, it's not the same as you can sell it to someone you don't know. Does that make sense? Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's a good thing to do and get yourself started, and it's an early version and stuff like that. But do remember that at a certain point, if you want to achieve your goals, you probably have to, sell this to people you don't know, right? And don't be deceived by, or, if you find, I don't know, go to the other extreme on the Facebook example and find the one place that doesn't have the yearbook, the digital yearbook yet, and I can sell it there and go from there. You may be a bit too much going easy, but again, I think it's a bit like that spectrum of competitive landscape. There's a spectrum of what's the right balance of that. Do I just start easy, fight and then expand out from there? Or do I really push hard? Do I get my product to a basic standard, but that's good enough for early adopters? Or do I not release it until it's really polished? And again, there's some sort of optimum for every product, and it's different for every product, or every project, sorry, I should say. So I don't want anyone to hear one size fits all, always be like this, always be like that. Does that make sense? every time I think of here's a rule, I find I can, there's an exception to it. But a lot of these are really good ideas to take into account. So the underlying idea there, Sam, is don't be deceived about who's going to buy this by doing it the easy way. If you're doing it a little easy to start with, just be honest about where that's at. Does that make sense? So that's probably my main comment there. Oh, sorry, another thing. Sorry to rattle on long, but it's fabulous to listen to these amazing stories from, Mr. Zuckerberg or whoever, right, who've, achieved things that you might be inspired by, but also be aware that there's a survivorship bias there, and the story that worked for them or the method that works for them, might be they were just lucky.
Yeah, exactly.
So don't overgeneralize from those as well.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you later about, the companies that fail,
Yep.
The things that you've seen.
Yep.
But I'm also interested, we're going out here, we're testing our ideas, we're releasing it.
Yep.
We need a product.
Mm-hmm.
How should founders approach building an MVP, and how good is good enough to send it out?
Yeah, totally. So I'll answer the second question first. Who gets to decide how good's good enough should be your customers, if that makes sense. It's you who decide, but you should decide by being informed by the customers. So there's a customer situation where super rough, approximate is very exciting to them and really, really, really valuable, right? And there's another customer who's like, oh, no, I can't touch that until it's, until you've been developing it for another 10 years. So listen to customers and then understand where different sorts of customers are on that and shape your plans accordingly. It's always desirable to release products early and rough as possible because that means you can do it quicker and with less capital, right? And the quicker and less capital you get to the point where you're engaging with the market, the better, unless it's too little, right? And you just put out something that's just junk and everyone it's not testing really what you wanted to test. It doesn't show any of the value you wanted to show or that sort of thing. So again, judgment calls.
So basically just designing the perfect experiment.
Well, everything's an experiment, right? And so generally speaking, we encourage people to ramp up the experiments too. And your first experiment isn't to show people a final product and say, will you buy it? Your first experiment is to talk to the people who you think might buy it and ask them about their needs. We love to be super curious about the needs, the lives, the problems, the pain points of the people we want to help. We've got a new invention and we go and talk to those people, understand their world. The better you can understand the world of the people you want to help, the more likely you are to build the product that they need. And then you can having done that, then you can test a bit harder and say, here's something I can describe verbally. Do you want it, right? And then you can test it a bit harder. Here's a drawing of what it's going to look like. Here's a mock-up. Here's a prototype that only half works, right? And every time you're continuing to test that thing, and then you get to the real hard test at a certain point, which is here's the product that you're going to pay. If that makes sense.
You mentioned something really important there, which was understanding your customer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've heard you say before that one way to test if you really know your customer is to give them less. Is that a tactic that you recommend or that you see people use?
It's a prompt that helps you to think about your business, right? So, and there's a whole lot of tools in your armory, and the skill is applying the right tool at the right time. But it's a fun activity, if nothing else, to say, I've figured out this great thing. I think people, they're very excited about it. They want it. You say, all right, what if we did less, right? Could we find a less that they would still be excited about? And that's doing a few things. It's testing the idea harder, right? Because it's a bit like Zuckerberg going to the school, starting at the school that was more competitive. So it's good to test things harder. It's also helping you to clarify what people care about. Because let's say we've got 3 features and I say you can have these 2 and people are still excited. That tells me that the third one wasn't so exciting, right? Maybe I thought it was. Maybe I take away the thing that I think is the coolest bit, and they still excited, right? So that's how you learn more. And early in the genesis of a project, you're trying to learn as much as possible, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And by cheaply, I don't mean just in money terms, but also in time terms, right? If you can just call around a few people, visit a trade show and chat to people and find out that something's not going to work, that's way quicker and cheaper than spending 6 months building it and then they didn't buy it.
No, fair enough. Along the same lines, I was reading the Steve Jobs biography, and I mean, we don't want to get into survivorship bias again, but one of his quotes was that he doesn't do market analysis because the customers don't know what they want until we've shown them. Is that a reality, or in most companies is that just a hoax and we should just test and see what the company?
Oh, so no,
like anyway?
we should test, but we got to test, and depending on how disruptive or different your product is, how far different it is from people's normal reality, there is absolutely a thing which is, you say, go back 2 years ago and say, do you want to talk to your search engine, right? And it'll talk back to you, and people go, whatever, right? Because they couldn't imagine what the latest generation of LLMs could actually do, right? You can't imagine it. So Steve's talking about that. The customer can't quite imagine what it's going to be. That doesn't mean we shouldn't learn about what the customer needs, what the customer's world, and then the super great product leader like Steve is the one who takes that understanding of the people he wants to help and turns it into a product design that meets that need, even though the people didn't know they wanted it, if that makes sense. And that is a creative process. Now, it can sometimes then look like Steve's a genius and all of that sort of stuff, but this is a process that's, I think, achievable by, basically everyone. You become expert in what you can do, and you become expert in what people need, and then you're finding the match. Does that make sense? So, but yes, customer discovery that says, do you want this future thing, doesn't work that well because people don't know that. That's why we ask them about their world. How do you do this task? What don't you like about it when you do this task, right? And then you often learn more from those slightly reverse questions, actually.
So I want to pivot the conversation a little bit to more for the entrepreneur who wants to get started thinking about ideas today. You had a lot of success betting on a new technology in the internet.
Yep.
To what extent should entrepreneurs bet on new technologies today? For example, artificial intelligence. And would entrepreneurs have maybe a larger probability of success if they're trying to use new technologies?
I think you should start with understanding why you're doing this and what you're passionate about, what you care about. And some people will start from the tech. It's so cool that you can do this or that with AI. Other people are starting from, here's a community I want to serve, or a big goal I want to help with climate, or something like that. So understand where you're coming from, what matters to you. And then, you're exploring that problem space. You're on a treasure hunt, right? If you're at that stage, you're on a treasure hunt. You've got a desire to do something impactful, right? Great. Now, to translate that into reality, we then say, right, within that broad desire, let's start exploring the landscape of what's possible, which is, what could I build? What could I do? Who might I help? And if the answer is everyone, you probably just need to narrow it down a little bit, at least in the short term. What do they need? All of that, and then test those ideas. And it's a treasure hunt because at some point you're going to pick up a piece of treasure, right? Which is, oh, I can see now how this can work, right? Now, when you think it can work, make some progress. Here's a good, and I think really for particularly students, but basically for everyone, when you're doing that, this is not the time to quit your course or your day job. When you're doing that, that's when you're exploring the possibilities, and you can do a lot of that in very little time. And it's all about the creative process, thinking what might that be, explore options. Then you can start to dip your toe in the water. I tell you what, let's just do a couple of little mock-ups or something like that, little resources, and step by step. And you should be self-skeptical on this, really, but then you try to convince yourself, actually there's something here, right? Then you can ramp up the amount of time and effort you put in projects. What I did when I became an entrepreneur was went and talked to my boss and said, I'm going to leave, but maybe if you gave me a leave without pay, that'd be cool in case it doesn't work out. And I got lucky, right? Let's take a bit of the luck out of it by ramping your way up to that, testing ideas, seeing if things would work. And then when you find something that might work or starts to feel like it's working, there's that idea of product market fit is one of the core parts of that. It's not the only part, by the way. You've got this situation where, wow, people really want what I'm doing. Great. Time to look into it further, including all the other bits around. Yeah, they might want it, but can I create the right business model around it? Can I create, all the other elements of a business? But I've been really mostly thinking about this at that, when we're thinking about what that project might be, I really tend to front load the customer part of it. Who's going to buy this? You can look, it's the deepest and hardest question about a business is who's your customer? Why do they care? Those two questions.
What ultimately sort of convinced you to leave your day job? Did you have to see like a certain amount of success or a certain amount of...
No, see, when I left my day job, I did it all wrong. I just imagined this future and quit my job effectively, and it was high risk. Today, if I was doing that, or I'm talking to people all the time about how they're doing that, you the founders, you the entrepreneurs, have to make your own judgments around your risk profile, right? What I want you to see is some of the modern tools that help you to understand that risk and de-risk by doing those cheap, quick activities that narrow down your focus so that you're more likely to put your effort where it gets the most reward or impact. So yeah, when should you step up? It's just sorry, how long's a piece of string? But if you're excited, that's a good start for sure. If you're not excited, no. If you're excited and other people around you start to get excited, if customers seem a bit excited, good. But then don't overinterpret that and overinvest in it. Ramp up. So we like this step-by-step ramping up and try to keep those steps maybe not small but medium-sized at the most, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What advice do you have for companies to sort of manage risk in the beginning? Obviously, there's a lot of risks that you're undertaking. Mm-hmm. What sort of risk do you see? And
well, there's a ton of risks, and you've got to try and understand what those risks are, and then you'll see some risks, and it depends on the sort of project, right? Maybe there's a safety risk, right? Well, we don't want people to be injured, right? So understand what that is. What can you do about it? And again, it just, it's so varied between different projects. But I think that starts from understanding what those risks are and then understand your risk tolerance. So always, if this doesn't work out as I thought, what will that mean, right? Will that mean I lose a bit of money, or I lose a bit of time, or there's a spectrum of outcomes, some of which are not great but not terrible, and then there's right up to the people are injured or worse, which you really got to stay away from. So what's that risk profile? I would suggest 9 times out of 10, but not 10 times out of 10. 9 times out of 10, the number one risk is customer risk. That is, will someone buy it, right? When you get past customer risk, then you enter into product risk. Is it, can I build what the customers want, right? And then you get into business risk, which is, can I build a business around this? You get into people risk. Can I build the right team around this? So all of those things will gradually enter into all of those aspects as a project develops.
One of the first risks you might encounter would be your co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the right co-founder. You started with your wife and sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and brother-in-law.
And brother-in-law as well. What was your experience starting a company with family relations? Is that something you would maybe recommend? And what sort of traits would you look for in a co-founder generally?
So the family thing, it's like anything, there's pluses and minuses. There's a great intimate knowledge of people and stuff like that, big pluses. It makes it a little hard to knock off at the end of the day because the business is before, during and after, and, all of that sort of stuff. So, family, you've really got to respect your other parts of your life as well. The family, you've got to have hobbies. You've got to keep yourself healthy. All of that. So, I don't think there's a formula. This one good, this one bad. I enjoyed the family thing. Yes, we had our moments, but it worked for us. Then there's the complete stranger one. There's a risk around that because that person might look good on paper, that you might get on with them in the first meeting, but later you find out that you don't get on, or you've got very different views underneath it. Early stage, I encourage people to develop those relationships with the potential founders, and what you're hoping for is that you'll evolve together. But again, brutal honesty. The more you work together, the less we feel like it's quite the thing. Try to be aware of that, spot it early, and be honest about it. Not every relationship like that's going to work short, medium, or long term, and I definitely see clashes that sometimes arise years later, right, as a thing. But you can really clear out a lot of that risk early by working together. I often say to people, you're super excited to work together. Let's not commit to the whole thing. Let's do some project together, right? Go from there, build up.
Yeah, testing that relationship again.
Yep.
One of the most important things with your co-founder is just to be brutally honest with them and fully transparent. Was that ever an issue for you with family members as well?
Oh, well, it's an issue for everyone, right? So I've just said brutally honest, right? But that doesn't mean being an ass about it and offending people and or just being too blunt. That's just makes people upset needlessly or something like that. So again, the people dynamics of this is really, really, really important. If you're studying entrepreneurship, you'll be studying business leadership, right? And that's a whole thing that I haven't even touched on. So you've got to find ways to get on with each other, and also to be, to have enough, the right honesty. I often start that with, I try to say self-honesty, because I think that's where it really starts. I'm self-honest, I didn't perform on that one, right? And then if you can say to your business partner, yeah, I didn't perform on that one, it's a lot easier for them to say, no, you didn't, Craig, right? If that makes sense. Now, you also hope that you build on that relationship and they'll say, Craig, come on, mate, or whatever. So, but we have to, I think there's a lot of benefits for being really, really clear about what's the reality, but we also got to realize we're dealing with human beings here, and human beings are social animals and all of that sort of stuff. So
what are some since starting TakeABreak, selling the company eventually, you floated around, been a mentor and investor here and there, and eventually settled at Canberra Innovation Network, where you mentor companies on the daily. What are some of the trends you see in the startups that fail?
Good question. So, firstly, I'm a bit careful about this word fail because it's a bit of a sad word. Now, there's definitely projects where they sort of fail in a pretty sad way. Mostly they're the ones where it actually got off to a great start and we really thought it was going somewhere and then didn't quite get there and a company went bankrupt or something like that. It really does feel like failure. It's no fun at all for anyone concerned. But a lot of things don't quite get to that point, and that's also called failure, but it's not really failure. And none of it's failure because I think you should, you're on this journey, you've got a big ambition. The standard you should set yourself is, did I give it a red hot go? Did we do our best here? You can't ask something more than someone's best in a given thing. So now, what are signs of failure? Signs of failure is, can't find that excited early customer, can't get the product working to the standard I want to or what the customer needs, can't find money. In the end, a business needs money. It's a hobby until you're paid to do it, then it's a business. And in a business, if you cannot collect as much money as you need to spend, it's not a viable business, right? So can you find those sources of money? Sometimes early days that's from grants or investors or winning competitions or lots of other things. But regardless, if you can't find money, you're stuck. And some people would call that failure. I would say didn't quite get there. Keep looking, right? Go back to that exploration phase. Go and maybe, have a full-time or a part-time job while you keep doing that explore thing. Not every idea is going to pan out. And don't let anyone get the idea that all my ideas have panned out, because they haven't.
Let's say you're a founder and, you've invested quite a bit of time and potentially money into an idea, and you come to the conclusion it's not really working. What advice do you have to pivot your business?
So again, first start from that honesty, and the earlier you can spot it, the easier it is. It's not quite working. And then when you see something's not quite working, or you see a challenge, right? And in fact, the day-to-day of real business is constant problem solving. Some are small problems, some are big problems. You're solving problems. When you see a problem or a challenge, you try to understand what it is, and then you try to figure out what we should do about that, right? Now, that could be I need to change the way I talk about the product. Could be I need to change the way I work with my team about delivering the product. Could be we're broken, we need to close down the company, right? In all cases, we do so respectfully. I think just respect the people involved. Try to stick to try to do the things you promised, which means also, by the way, try not to promise things that you are not really sure you can do. And work your way through the process. When things are bad, break it down into steps of process, right? I'm a bit stuck. Okay, what can I do today about that? You know what? I can just have a little rest and refresh my brain because I'm overdone. It could be that, right? Or I am going to explore some other ideas, or I'm going to stop doing this thing that's just costing me more than we can afford, right? It's just I can give you a list of 10 tools because each project will need and different stages will need different answers. But I think if you start from this idea that you're going to have setbacks and you're going to find things that don't work, and just take that as an inevitable part of the journey, then when you get to those stages, big or little setbacks, you're like, yeah, good, I knew this would happen. Now, what am I going to do about this particular setback?
What was one of your biggest setbacks when you were starting TakeABreak?
In the early days?
Yeah, in the early days.
We were pretty lucky. I mentioned some technical setbacks where we lost data and did dumb things like that. What's a good example of a setback? We did a whole bunch of marketing activities that didn't work, right? We went to, I think I mentioned the travel expos where there was all the retirees, didn't work. We advertised in media that didn't work. That's no criticism of the marketing team. It's just not everything you try in that area will work, and it was all new. And that's another example of what didn't work.
Were there any points in the business?
We hired people who didn't work out. It's a thing.
What was that experience like?
It was not fun, right? It's no fun when you've found this awesome person, maybe a technologist, and they can build some great things, but in the end they want to build different what you want them to build or something like that. And you try to respectfully work through the process, and in the end potentially part ways. And then think, I paid them a whole lot of money that didn't result in what I needed. That's no fun. Or I put a whole lot of effort into that and didn't get where we hoped it would. No fun. You will not find anyone who's ever done anything in business who hasn't had all of those problems and many more, right? It's just, if you think it's going, if you don't, you've got to be, if you don't want to deal with problems like that, don't go into business.
You once told me that running a startup was type 2 fun rather than type 1 fun.
Well, it can be type 1 fun as well, right? So type 1 fun is we're having fun doing this, right? And if you talk to me or most entrepreneurs, you'll say there's plenty of days when we're just like, this is cool. I love doing this process. But there's also plenty of times where it's really hard. It's not fun. It's like maybe climbing up a cliff and you're scared of heights and you're shivering and shaking and you're tired and you nearly fall down and it's not fun. But then you get to the top and you think, that was fun, right? That's what we mean by type 2 fun. And it's absolutely, there's things that might happen in your business career that are like that. You're just like, that was hard and stressful, but rewarding. Okay. I don't want to tell people they have to get into stressful situations to be an entrepreneur, but I don't want to sugarcoat it either. It often happens.
So starting a business, it sounds stressful, takes a lot of commitment, it's painful. Why should someone start a company if they're thinking about it?
Well, that's maybe you shouldn't, right? So, and I don't think it's for everybody, and I don't, but I think it's for more people, and maybe they would think people should go into business when they're passionate about something, and going into business is the best way of achieving that passion. So or they enjoy the process, or like you've got to find your own motivations. And I don't want to say I can say here's a typical motivation and everyone's like that. I really find there's such a wide variety in all the different entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, there's so many different, motivations. And it's often different motivations at different stages of the business as well. Sometimes you start something just because it's cool. And then later, you're like, my big motivation is my team depends on me. I've got employees, right? If I don't keep running this business well, they're going to lose their jobs. And I'm not joking, that's often a really important motivation for business leaders as the business starts to grow. They've got an obligation to their team, obligation to their customers. It's a slightly negative motivation actually in a way, but it's real. Or I just want to create all these I want to be part of creating the future. That's what motivates me. I want to be part of creating the future. I don't want to be a passive rider into the future. I want to be, positively engaged in, building a future world that's somehow better than the current world. That's what motivates me, but it's totally personal to lots of different people. For people who are thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't, here's the good news. You don't have to necessarily decide right now. What you can do is dip your toe in the water. What you can do is engage in that process. You can develop some ideas, start to explore its potential, do an entrepreneurship course, right? You can do these things that give you exposure and then see if it's right for you, if it's drawing you in. You can do a competition. You can, there's lots of entrepreneurship activities you can do, and if that draws you in, keep doing it. If it's not for you, maybe other careers are better for you, and that's okay too, right? But I would say test it, test the experience.
Well, Craig, thanks for coming on, inspiring and informing the people who are hopefully going to build the future through their own businesses. How can people hear more from you and get involved with the events at the Canberra Innovation Network?
So firstly, thanks for inviting me, and thanks to you and the other people in the ANU Entrepreneurship Club, because I think it's really important for activities like that to happen, for people who are interested in entrepreneurship to act on it, right? Entrepreneurship is a doing things sport. Go and act on it, getting together, doing those activities. So that's fantastic. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Those people who want to engage more, our website, cbrin.com.au. You're all fast readers. You can see what's on it. There's a whole wide range of activities, specific activities you can look at and think about, and I won't try and pitch them all. What I will say is be active in your community. Be active, look for things that you can do, get involved in, and sort of get out of the back room and the lab. Sometimes we need to in the back room and the lab to build something, but you need to get out there, be part of the community, try things, do things, and see where it leads.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Craig.
Pleasure.